Hey guys, welcome to Reality Check. I'm Huang Jiyuan. The last time an American Treasury Secretary visited China was in 2019. At that time, China and the United States were locked in a trade war. 4 years later, another American Treasury Secretary is here in China again. Has the situation got any better? Tariffs, sanctions, export controls, restrictive measures have remained, if not worsened. So the question is, will Janet Yellen's visit to China make a difference? I've invited Warwick Powell here to talk about it. He's the adjunct professor at the Queensland University of Technology and the chairman of Smart Trade Networks. So Professor Powell, here's what everyone's thinking about. Several weeks ago, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in China. Many saw that trip as having yielded little results. Do you see the same for Yellen's visit?
I think the first thing that we need to come to grips with, if you will, around the world, and each country and each group of people will have its own perspective on this, of course, and that is that we have already left the unipolar world. The unipolar world, or the unipolar moment, has ended. Pax Americana is no longer the practical reality of how the world works today. In other words, we have entered into the early stages of a new multipolar global order. That's the first thing. Coming to grips with that fundamental reality helps ground you in the realities of the world as it is, as opposed to the hopes and wishes that one may have about how the world ought to be. The thing to be mindful of, in my view, with these sorts of visits is the promise that the talk will somehow be followed by the walk. Right? And I think it is increasingly clear to people around the world, not just in China, but any observer from the global south and elsewhere, that the US in particular has developed a habit of speaking and saying one thing whilst doing another. So in the Chinese, we'd say, 说一套,做一套. And that habit is something that the world, by and large, has actually become accustomed to and knows exactly what's going on.
And speaking of 说一套做一套, UK Ambassador to China Caroline Wilson made a statement about trust several days ago, and here's what she said.
We are sorely lacking in trust at the moment. I wonder if everybody's familiar with the definition. I mean, the definition of trust is interesting. You know, it's about believing in people, believing that others are reliable, that they mean what they say, and that they are speaking the truth. We may not end up loving each other, and we have to accept we have some fundamental differences here. There are fundamental differences between our countries, our political systems, and indeed in some of our values. We may not end up loving each other, but we do need to do something to enhance mutual trust, because trust is the bedrock of all relations, including between states.
Now, clearly, China and the United States are not on good terms at the moment. We can't even say we trust one another, and this 说一套做一套 is at the center of it. The Biden administration keeps on saying that it wants better relations with China, but it also keeps slapping all kinds of sanctions and restrictions on China as well. And there's the elephant in the room, no pun intended. We are looking at the 2024 presidential election. Republicans are announcing their runs one after another. So even if Yellen's visit gets positive results, shouldn't we be worried about the administration bowing under domestic political pressure and doing something that negates all the good that might come out of this?
The common thing across the political spectrum is that the US has adversaries and China's actually the main game. The only difference is a tactical one. Do you deal with Ukraine and Russia first, or is that a distraction from China? That's it. So Biden has got pressures domestically, right, coming from all sides, whether it's coming from, you know, the sort of democratic challenges who aren't getting much air at the moment, but Kennedy and others, who are basically saying that the US should pull out of the Ukraine debacle and focus its energies on China. And then on the Republican side and the neocon side, you've got that mixture of attitudes as well. He's got no room to move if he's going to, if he's going to find a pathway, forward to November. And in fact, in this kind of febrile environment, in any bit of loose rhetoric that could be interpreted or spun as weakness and concessionary will be used against him. So the next 18 months or so is going to see, I think, a domestic environment in the US which drives the political establishment to increasingly hostile rhetoric at a minimum, and possibly a need to prove that you're not just talk, right? The fact that the administration got pressured into spending $400,000 on high-tech missile technology to knock out a balloon tells you how much pressure is on this administration now in relation to its stance vis-a-vis China.
Well, that's not very optimistic, I have to say. It doesn't bode well for the future.
I think the fact of the matter is this. The challenges that the US has faced over the last 10 to 15 years has eventually boiled to this point. But what are the challenges? Well, the challenges have been an economic system that has failed to live up to the promise. Deindustrialization and hollowing out has been a reality. And the debate has been whether it's because of trade with China, that is, China stole the jobs, or because technology automated the jobs away. The reality, though, is that on the trade front, yes, some of the activities that used to happen in North America now happen in China. But it has delivered aggregate benefits. That's what trade does. The problem has been distributional. So the aggregate benefits didn't get distributed across the American body politic in a way that made the benefits fair across the system. Wall Street benefited, but Main Street didn't. That's a domestic policy problem and a system problem, because finance capital has actually become the dominant player in the way that value flows and political decision-making works in North America. Right? Now, until those issues get resolved, until the domestic economic circumstances and system actually delivers better living standards and better social infrastructure and better economic infrastructure, then there's always going to be the pressure to blame somebody, right? And to pass the buck onto someone else. That's what's going to happen.
Let's do hope that at some point in the near future, that problem can be solved and we all can get our sane diplomatic relations back. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Powell. There you have it. Whether Yellen's visit to China makes a difference or not is not entirely up to her. A mixture of deeply rooted systematic problems and present-day political pressure will shape the results of her visit in the long term.